Hi, hello, I'm Lillia Kurako, and welcome to the first ever episode of True Crime Time. If you're interested in true crime, I would really appreciate if you give this video a like and hit that subscribe button down below. I promise there'll be a lot more content coming very soon. This episode was actually recorded over on Twitch and has then been edited for your enjoyment on YouTube. Today's episode will cover one of the UK's most horrific criminals, and their name is David Fuller. I was absolutely horrified at this person's actions when doing my research for this case, and I absolutely cannot believe how awful some people can actually be. Therefore, I would like to give a few trigger warnings for today's video. This video will discuss things such as taking the lives of others, SA, and necrophilia. So if these are things you're not actually comfortable with hearing about today, I completely understand. Please click away from the video, and I'm sure I will cover something in the future which you will feel comfortable watching. I would also like to make everyone aware that these videos are for educational purposes only. The information discussed within today's video has been compiled from research I've conducted on the internet, and absolutely no disrespect is meant towards any of the victims which we will be discussing today. So, without further ado, let's get into today's video. Today I am going to be, for my first true crime series, I'm going to be talking about David Fuller. This is David Fuller. I couldn't actually find much information on his very early life. I found that he was born on the 4th of September 1954. He lived in Tunbridge Wells, which is in Kent, in England, and I believe he was born here and lived here for his whole life. In 1973 and 1976, where he was aged 19 and 22, he was actually convicted of quite a lot of burglaries, where he entered into people's homes through the windows, which is something to keep in mind. When he was an adult, in his adult life, he was employed as a maintenance worker within hospitals. So from 1989 to 2011, he was employed by the Kent and Sussex Hospital. And then he actually moved to Pembury Hospital in 2011, where he actually remained until his arrest. It's actually said to have been married for a total of 3 times, so married and divorced. And 2 of them ended in divorce because he had affairs, so you can see what kind of person this is already. One of the affairs was actually said to have been with a nurse that he met through his job working at the hospital, and his 3rd wife was actually still with him at the time he was finally arrested, and was actually present in the house at the same time his arrest actually took place. The initial offences of today's case, because this case is actually split up into 2 sections. It's quite a strange one. So the ones which originally caused his arrest occurred in 1987 when he was aged 33 years. These 2 offences actually were known as the bedsit deaths. Within the cases, David unalived both Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce. So we're going to get into the lives of both Wendy and Caroline now. So this is Wendy. She was, at the time of her death, a 25-year-old shop manager at a shop called Super Snaps, which, from what I can gather, is like a picture developing shop. You know, when you used to take your films in from your cameras and you'd get your photographs developed and they'd put them in the little paper sleeves, and then you'd take them home. On the 23rd of June 1987, Wendy Nell was actually found by her boyfriend called Ian Plass. She was found deceased in her property. Sadly, Ian, her boyfriend, blames himself for what happened, which of course none of it was his fault. It's so upsetting that he blames himself for this. He says it was his fault because they had actually spent that evening together on the 23rd of June, and he had walked her back to her apartment, dropped her back at her apartment, and left her there for the night. She'd gone back into her apartment and he had gone home, so he didn't stay with her that night. And he was actually planning to ask her to marry him on a trip they had planned. They were going to go to Paris and he was going to propose to her. So it's really sad. Ian received a call from Wendy's mum at 11 a.m. on the 24th of June, so the next day, saying that she couldn't get hold of Wendy. She tried calling Wendy, you know, Wendy wasn't answering, which was quite unheard of for Wendy. Wendy's mother called Ian, Wendy's boyfriend, and he went round to Wendy's apartment, and because she didn't open the door, he was knocking and knocking, she never answered, and she hadn't turned up for work either. He actually climbed through an open window in her apartment, and sadly he found her deceased and went to a nearby fire station, I believe, to report this. A colleague had gone to Wendy's flat that morning at around 9 a.m. because she hadn't turned up for work. They were knocking on the door calling for her, but she never answered, so they actually left. They didn't know where she was. Eyewitnesses state that that night they actually saw a man looking through the windows of homes near Wendy that were occupied by females. Wendy was found with blunt force trauma to the head, asphyxiation, so she was strangled, and there was SA after death, which seems to be a very running theme within this. The second victim was called Caroline Pierce. This occurred almost exactly 5 months to the day of Wendy's killing. So this happened on the 24th of November, 1987, whereas Wendy was on the 23rd of June. So it's pretty much 5 months to the day of Wendy's killing. So Caroline Pierce was 20 years old. She was very young, and she fell victim to David Fuller after she was dropped off at her home by a taxi driver. This was approximately around 10 to 12 at night, or 5 to 12, so 11:50, 11:55 p.m. Caroline was actually not found until 3 weeks later, and this was found on the 15th of December 1987. It was found 40 miles away from her house by a farmer. This farmer found her in a fetal position in a water-filled ditch. She was only wearing a pair of tights with no underwear, and she was completely undressed from the waist up. Her cause of death was said to be asphyxiation or strangulation again, and there was some evidence of SA also present. 8 weeks prior to her death, she had actually had locks added to her windows, as she reported that she didn't feel safe, and she had actually noticed a peeping Tom in the area. So she had noticed someone looking through women's windows and stuff. She had said to people that she didn't feel safe. She had new locks installed on her windows so she could lock them. It's so sad because she tried to go and make those changes and precautions and things. It wasn't enough. And on that night of her death, neighbors actually reported hearing a woman scream, and it's believed to have been Caroline. I believe that she didn't actually make it into her house. It's believed that David actually attacked her before she could actually make it to her house after being dropped off by the taxi driver outside of her house. It's really sad. She made all of these extra precautions and tried to do everything she could to make herself safe. You know, she didn't walk home. She did everything by the book. She got a taxi when it was late at night. She installed new locks. You know, she was being vigilant, and it's just awful that it's not enough sometimes. This is an example actually of the type of ditch that her body was found. I don't believe it's the one. I found this picture on a news article. It said that it was an example. Just for some context, this is the kind of thing that the farmer found Caroline's body in. Now we're going to go on to the evidence that was found for this case. David was actually eventually linked to both murders. He was said to be a visitor at the restaurant where Caroline worked. She worked at a restaurant called Buster Brown's, and he had also had photos developed at Super Snaps. So he had been present at both girls' workplaces, and photographs were actually found in his home in the Super Snaps branded sleeves. I'm not sure whether it was just a coincidence or whether he actually tracked these women specifically or not. It could have been the case, but it also could not have been, so I don't want to say that it was. Trace evidence was actually found, and trace evidence is super small particles of evidence which can be transferred when two objects touch. So for example, skin cells, hair, fibers from clothing, things like that. There was trace evidence from David found on Wendy's duvet, because she was found deceased in her bed, and also on Caroline's tights, and these were reported to have been skin cells. This evidence was eventually linked back to David when DNA analysis was completed. There was also evidence of SA, like I mentioned before, which linked back to David. He was also said to have taken trophies from each woman. There were several items that were taken, but each woman had a keychain each taken from them. So it is believed that this is supposed to be a trophy. So this picture at the top, I'm going to go into some more detail about it. How was David found? The DNA database in the UK was actually created in 1995. So it was a long time. They stored the evidence from 1987. They knew that it would be of some value sometime in the future. They, couldn't really do anything with it at that time. But then the DNA database in 1995 was created, and that allowed for DNA profiles from every single person that they'd taken them from to be compiled into one computerized database, so they could be accessed by, any police force around the country. David Brother's profile was actually on the database when it was created in 1995, and this sprung up a match to David. When they did a cold case review in 2007, they reopened the case of Wendy and Caroline. This led to then David's DNA being identified by the police. It was found to be a similar match to David's brother, meaning that it was likely an individual within David's brother's close family. On top of that, there was a bloody fingerprint at Wendy's house. I believe I read that it was on a shopping bag. It wasn't in several sources. That's why I didn't put it down. I like to cross-check sources. I saw it in like one, so I don't want to say that it was definitely that. So a positive fingerprint match to David was identified in Wendy's home. A fingerprint is actually a piece of evidence which is not circumstantial. If there's a fingerprint in blood on a piece of evidence within someone's house, then that individual must have been at that scene. And because it was on a shopping bag, you could say, oh, maybe it was done, like at the shopping place or something. I believe it was done in Wendy's blood. You're not going to get someone's blood all over your fingers and put it on a shopping bag without, some sort of altercation. There was also a bloody footprint which was found on the cuff of a blouse which was in Wendy's flat. This was actually said they had looked through pictures of David from the 80s and 70s. It was a match to a Clarks' brand Sports Trek style shoe, which was in pictures of David that was taken around those, the same time. You can see that in that picture there. There is the cuff of Wendy's blouse. I don't know whether you can see my cursor here. Here's the cuff of Wendy's blouse, and this light pink mark right here is the shoe impression from David's shoe. This is the shoe in question. You can see that the pattern actually matches up to that of the print on Wendy's blouse. And here is a picture that they had found within David's personal, family photo collection from around the time of the murders. And here you can see that he is actually wearing the exact shoe that was present at the scene. As you can see here, all of the evidence is beginning to mount up against David at this point. David was arrested on the 3rd of December 2020. He was arrested at his home in Tunbridge Wells for the deaths of both Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce, which occurred back in 1987. When police were actually searching his home, they found several hard drives, as you can see in this picture. They found several hard drives which actually included some absolutely horrific images and videos. It was actually revealed that David had been recording and photographing himself as deceased women and girls at his hospital maintenance job. He had worked out a way in which he could secretly access the morgue with his maintenance worker access pass once the morgue workers had left work for the day. They left at approximately 4 p.m. and this route actually avoided all of the security cameras and detection from anyone who actually accessed the morgue after hours. You know, if they had a new deceased body to put into the morgue. One of the hard drives, just one of them, contained 800,000 images and 504 videos. The video we're going to watch now is actually the body cam footage of the police when they found the hard drives.
Place the drawer, pull the drawer out, put it in the bag.
Yeah, you just want the whole lot done like
The
that.
whole lot. Yep. I'll have that one as well.
If I'm honest, I don't think anyone could have predicted what we were going to find when we searched his house.
Are they ones he's taken?
Well, why does that person look dead?
So it was actually concluded that between 2005 and 2020, David had actually documented the SA of 101 women and girls aged between as young as 9 years old and up to 100 years old, which is absolutely horrific. He was actually abusing the victims, noting down their personal details from the morgue documents, and then actually looking the individuals up on social media after it happened so that he could find out more information about them. Honestly, it makes me truly speechless. I don't even know what to say about this. So the last victim was recorded on the 30th of November 2020, and this was actually 3 days before he was arrested for the deaths of Wendy and Caroline, which happened in 1987. That is 15 years continuously, 15 years of continuously committing these absolutely abhorrent, horrific acts on these poor, deceased individuals. David said that he carried maintenance equipment with him at all times when he was committing the essay on the deceased individuals. And this was so that he had an excuse for actually being in the morgue area if someone did happen to walk in. Sadly, he was actually never caught for this. No one ever found him doing this. I don't know how he can go 15 years without being caught for doing things like this. He also had an extensive internet search history for similar depraved content which focused on essay against women and girls. We have another short clip detailing how he was actually able to access the morgue area without ever being caught for doing so.
David Fuller had a swipe card for the mortuary because he sometimes needed to do maintenance work there. He knew that staff went home at 4 p.m. Porters might still visit the receiving area, delivering bodies, but the same fridges had doors opening onto the post-mortem area where Fuller committed his crimes. Here there was no CCTV until recently, and the fridge doors were unlocked. Fuller gained access through the utility rooms, avoiding cameras, but he still needed to swipe in.
Surely if someone was constantly swiping into one area when they didn't have to be there, why was it not brought up? Why was it not questioned? It should have been questioned. Someone should have noticed that. And I'm sure it's due to something like lack of funding. The NHS is struggling. It's really struggling lately, and I'm sure that's the reason why. But surely someone would have noticed that this maintenance guy keeps swiping into this one area when there's no maintenance to do in this area. It just seems very strange that it was never questioned. David actually pled guilty on the 8th of October 2021, so this was very, very recently actually. He pled guilty to 51 different offences against 78 of the 101 victims who had been identified at that point. So only 78 out of 101 had been identified by the 8th of October 2021. 51 different offences against these people were determined, and because of this he was sentenced to 12 years of imprisonment. Then on the 4th of November 2021, so just under a month after that, he was put on trial for causing the deaths of Wendy and Caroline. It took him 4 days to actually plead guilty for these crimes, so he was pleading innocent for 4 full days for the deaths of Wendy and Caroline. He originally attempted to plead not guilty on the grounds of diminished responsibility. So this means that David claimed he was suffering from an abnormality in mental functioning at the time of their deaths. So he said he was not in control of himself and his mind during the acts. But this was actually dismissed by the courts as the deaths were actually deemed to be premeditated. Because of this, on the 15th of December 2021, he was actually sentenced to a whole life order on top of the 12 years he got for the other acts. A whole life order means that he will never be given an opportunity for parole and will actually remain in custody for the remainder of his life. So David, he's not getting out. He's never getting out. He's never being given the opportunity for parole or anything like that, as it should be. On the 3rd of November 2022, so a full year after he was sentenced for the other acts, David was sentenced to a further 4 years to be completed alongside the 12-year sentence and his whole life order. And this was given because he pled guilty to the assaults of the other 23 victims. So that totaled all of the 101 victims during the time that he was SA the people. Even though he was going to get a full life order anyway, he will never get out for the sentencing against Wendy and Caroline. It's still customary to actually sentence for all of the crimes. So it's acknowledged every single person that was affected by David and his acts are actually acknowledged, and they are given the chance for justice. During court, they talked a lot about the hard drives and things like that, and he was actually very methodical and meticulous about his hard drives. He had labelled them in a very particular way. There was folders labelled things such as Necrolord, Register, and Deadly, and within the Deadly folder there was actually a subfolder named Deadliest, and then within that a folder titled 00 Best Yet. This folder then contained the names of women, and each of these folders is where he stored images and videos of each of the victims. He had their names and all of the pictures of him committing horrific acts on each of the women, categorized and stored into their own files on these hard drives. But because he sorted these images out and put them into files and things like that, it just shows the absolute depravity of his actions and how sound of mind he actually was at the time he was doing this. By sound mind, it means someone's mental ability to understand what he was doing at that time and how it would actually affect others. And it showed that he was able to differentiate between right and wrong at that point, which also would negate any attempt at insanity or, you know, not being in control of his mind at that point. There was absolutely no remorse for a single thing, no thought of the victims at all. It was all about himself, and it was just obvious he just did not care. Obviously, I've done the research. There's some things that I read that I could not put in here. I read some of the official court documents. The acts and things that he committed are some of the worst things that I have ever read. And I truly mean that. The youngest person he assaulted was only 9 years old. That is someone's little girl that he assaulted. She was deceased. Her family would have come and seen her in the morgue. They would have said goodbye to her. And then this happened. So in the final sentencing on the 7th of December 2022, all of the evidence was actually ordered to be destroyed by the judge. The videos, the pictures, all of the hard drives, everything like that have actually been destroyed now, luckily. So no one will ever be able to get their hands on any of this material. David is actually being held in HM Prison Franklin in County Durham, and he's going to remain there for the rest of his life now. He was doing this for 15 years, and there was said to be 101 documented victims, so there could have been other victims possibly that weren't documented, but that is approximately 6 to 7 victims per year. I personally think that there was more. Honestly, I think that he just started documenting it in 2005, but I think there was more. I don't think you would just not do anything for 18 years and then suddenly start again. 18 years later. Like we saw from the video of the police finding, you know, searching his house and finding things, it looks like he also had some of the pictures printed, which makes me wonder, did he print them himself, or did he take them to a photo printing place, you know, like Super Snaps where Wendy worked? If so, why did no one see them? Because they used to do it manually, didn't they? So surely someone should have seen these images. So here, it looks like they take out this pile of papers, and it looks like there's, from what they say, printed images. See here, it looks like they're looking at actual physical pictures here. If it's on a hard drive, they would take it out and get a digital forensics team to look at the hard drives themselves. To end it off, really, I just want to give my absolute utmost respect to the victims of this case. The victims aren't only the actual deceased individuals who were violated and assaulted by David, but it's actually their family and friends as well. The amount of people that were affected by this is absolutely insanely huge. A lot of them have reported feeling so much guilt for what occurred. None of it was their fault, but they feel guilty for leaving their deceased family members and friends at the morgue to be assaulted without their knowledge by David. I can't imagine how awful and hard it must have been to find out that this happened to your loved one. It must have been awful. A few of them have said that they feel like their cherished and loved memories with the deceased people have actually been tainted and destroyed by David and his actions. They can't even think of the lovely memories that they had together without thinking of what David did to them. And I just can't understand why anyone would do something like that. I really can't. He thought that it was just okay for him to destroy the dignity of 101 deceased women and girls, as well as taking the lives of 2 innocent young women, Wendy and Caroline. Why did he think that it was okay for him to do any of those things? And he had absolutely no remorse for a single action that he committed. I do not know any of the names of the deceased individuals. They have been kept anonymous, and I believe that is the best thing to do. I don't think their names need to be out there. I think it's best for them to just rest now. Thank you all very much for taking the time to watch the first ever episode of True Crime Time. I've really enjoyed researching and compiling all of the information for today's case. This style of content is something which I've been wanting to do for such a long time now, but I've never actually had the confidence to do it. So I'm really looking forward to the future of this content. If you'd like to see more of me, I do stream several times a week over on Twitch and Kick. You can find me on my social medias using the name Lillia Kurako, and the links to these are also in the description box down below. If you enjoyed this video, a like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated. I'm actually currently trying to reach 100 subscribers over on YouTube. I just wanted to say a huge thank you once again for your support with this new style of content. I can't wait to see what the future holds for it. Hopefully I will see you in the next video, and have an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye!